everybody, how's it going today? GoldPlasma231 here, back in day with a bit of a video that I thought I may make, but not really in the form factor I think I'm about to make this video in. Honestly, I don't even know how this video is going to work. Of course, as you saw from not only the title, but thumbnail and whatever else you've seen of this video before you actually decide to click on it, today we are going to be talking about Märchen Crown, which is a brand new series running in Weekly Young Jump in Japan, of course, and I'm currently reading it on Manga Plus, which is, of course, by Shueisha, and it is by Asakasa, who is, of course, the author of Oshi no Ko, Love is War, and a few of these other series that have been very prominent that he has done. And, of course, I reviewed Oshi no Ko for a very long time on this YouTube channel. I mean, I covered like 60-something chapters of it, which is still just crazy to sit down here and be like, man, I covered that series for over a year and a half. Like, it's just totally incredible to think about. And whenever Oshi no Ko ended, we got the idea that, like, hey, Asakasa is, of course, not done as a manga author yet. They're still penning a new story, which seems to be a romance fairy tale story. And that's really all we knew until it was about, like, what, 3 weeks or something ago? Honestly, I didn't even hear this announcement, but apparently we learned what the series is called. It is called Märchen Crown, which from a Reddit post that I found roughly translates out to about fairy tale crown, and it is written by Asakasa, Ajichika, and Aoiji Kura. And from what I sort of could tell about who these people are, so Chika is somebody who is the artist of Record of Ragnarök. That is a series that I have heard about, but I've never actually sat down and read. I may check it out here at some point. And then I'm still trying to figure out who this Aoiji Kura person is. Like this manga says, it is from the creators of Oshi no Ko and Record of Ragnarök. So I'm wondering if it's like, okay, Asakasa and this Akiji Okura person are the writers of the series, and Chika is the illustrator of the series. We honestly don't really know a bunch of that. If we do, I am not very prone and privy to any of that various information. But from the brief little thing I have seen about this series is apparently, as in most Asakasa works, that has some big twist at the end. And at this point, I don't know what this twist is yet, because I have actually not read this chapter yet. And I figured, like, hey, let's do a little bit of a different video. Of course, I figured I may be covering this series all the way back when Oshi no Ko ended, being like, hey, I covered Oshi no Ko for a good long while, and I had time to record some YouTube videos today. I was going to get done like a World Trigger and a few of those other ones, which may still happen, but I'm like, hey, what if we check out this other series instead by an author I covered extensively on this channel? So yeah, really, I just want to hop into this. Of course, what do we have? It is a 68-page chapter according to Manga Plus. Manga Plus, there's a few extra pages in there for like ads and all of that. So it's probably like a 62 or so page chapter. So a bit longer than your average manga chapter, or your average first of a manga chapter. And the really interesting thing about this chapter is what it is titled, right? Because of course, this is chapter number 1, which is chapter 0, Everlasting Happiness, chapter 1, The World You Longed For. And also, the chapter number for this chapter is very, very interesting. It is, of course, chapter number 1, except how it is written is very interesting. It's not just like number 1. It is number 000,001. Hey guys, editing GoldPlasma231 here, and quickly I want to say a few things about what I'm currently talking about. First off, this chapter is actually 65 pages long, so I was sort of there, but also, as I will be discussing later, this is actually chapter number 0 and chapter number 1 combined. That is why there's a weird thing. So of course, this did not come to me in the moment, because, like, I just wasn't thinking about it. I was like, man, this is a really weird thing. Manga Plus, the way they display their numbers is they always do it with 3 digits, and the first chapter of most series is chapter 001, right? So they just get it. So if it gets up to 100 chapters, great. If it doesn't, it doesn't, right? So pretty much what this chapter saying is that it is chapter number 0, so 000, and then comma, along with being chapter number 1, as we will really be getting into. Like, I also talked about it later in the video. The chapter number 1 is actually about what is that, 19 pages like I discussed, which means that the other chapter is, or the main chapter 0 is also 45 pages as the sort of pilot, and then chapter number 1 is really where the stuff goes down. We will all be getting into that very much later in this video, being this is my first read-through of this chapter, but I just quickly wanted to make a little bit of a clarification there, saying that, like, hey, here in a minute, I'm not going to cut any of it out just because, like, I don't really see why I should. But just know that part, like, hey, every time I bring up, like, hey, this chapter has 6 digits for some reason, yes, it's just the 3 digits that they normally are with 2 of them being put together. It's just simple as that. Just my brain wasn't really thinking in the correct way for that. But, like, either way, hope you guys enjoy this weird video on me doing a live reading of Märchen Crown. Yeah, all of that stuff out the way. I'll see you guys in the video. Which, just the way that that sort of laid out here, and also, like, how the chapter title is, like, everlasting happiness, the world that you longed for. I think it's going to be something where it gets, like, flipped on its head, and, like, we count down in time, like, we actually go to, like, oh man, this is actually chapter number 10,000, we count down, or something weird and random like that, right? Being that the chapter title is titled, like, Chapter 0, Everlasting Happiness, comma, Chapter 1, the world you longed for. Honestly, don't really know a whole lot about that. And also, let me just quickly read what the summary is off of Manga Plus. Rapunzel is a young girl who lives atop a tall tower and knows nothing of the outside world. One day, she meets a boy named Michael, who climbs a tower, and her destiny to change the world begins to unfold. The creators of Oshi and Record of Ragnarök form an incredible team to bring you the ultimate love story, right? And of course, like I said, knowing Asa Asakasa, we don't know what twist is laying here, but hey, maybe I will figure it out. So we're just going to go through sort of a live reading, me reading all of these things out and butchering everything as we go on. So yeah, I'm sort of interested to see how this happens. Now, of course, I thought about possibly streaming this live on the YouTube channel, but I personally don't have a good microphone right now to be able to do that. Also, because I record everything off my phone, and I can't really use my phone as a microphone and also hook it up to my computer to live stream, so I can't really do all of that. But yeah, without any further ado, let's hop in to chapter number 1, chapter number 0, chapter number 0000001, whatever you want to call it. So we start, oh, let me also mute Discord real quick before we get started. Let me also close Discord so I'm just not distracted by the 15 images that somebody just sent to Digimon server I'm a part of, but alright. Fairies and elves, houses made of sweets and pumpkin cigarettes, and princesses and their princes on white horses. Exciting and colorful, tied up neatly with a happy ever after. Such stories as these now begins. The tale of a boy and girl led by a mysterious fate. This is their fairy tale, their Märchen. Alright, seems pretty interesting. I do like the definitely art style we are getting here for sure. Just seeing how the main character looks, and sort of like we have this interesting like stained glass window looking thing of like flowers and all of that. And, like, yeah, Märchen Crown, but chapter number 0, Everlasting Happiness. So, alright. Once upon a time, in a forest far, far away, stood a tall tower unknown to anyone. In the heist room, there lived a girl with long, long hair. She was a very beautiful girl indeed. The girl had never gone outside this tall tower. That was because she had made a promise. The tower belonged to a wicked witch, or so she was called, whose spells and curses had hurt many. The old witch had told her, "The world outside is filled with wicked people and terrible, frightening things. So you must never dream of leaving this tower. Promise me, Rapunzel." The girl never once from the day she was born dared to break that promise. Alright, I like this. It's sort of cool. We got this tower, and it's definitely very much the Rapunzel fairy tale. I hate to admit, I am not very caught up on all of my various fairy tales, so I think this is pretty key to, like, how the Rapunzel story was going, but I'm not really sure. I do like the way that it's sort of, like, shown in this moment, like, just the small window and, like, the way this witch is clad, and, like, also we see, like, a little bit of, like, a horned skull in the bottom whenever the witch is telling her, like, hey, don't go out into the outside world. It's so interesting, and also just the way this main character, or this main female character, Rapunzel's face is clouded in shadow every time we've seen her so far. It seems pretty interesting, right? And then we now see a man sitting on a tree as some narration continues, like, hey. Meanwhile, in another place, there was a mischievous young lad. Oh, I love the wording of, like, a young lad. It's like whenever I run my D&D campaigns, which I also do. I don't know if I ever will put any of those things online, but I always try to use, like, words like, oh, yes, the lot of heroes, or, like, some other thing to, like, say, like, yo, you're not just, like, a party, you're something more. Like, I want it to sound more British, because I think that's more funnier. I don't know if that's just me, but, like, hey, there's this mischievous young lad. There was an old legend in the village where he had lived, and the great northern forest beyond the thorny thicket where none had dared to go was said to be that of a tower of a wicked witch. That day, this young lad set out on a journey to see if the legend was true. He was not the prince of some neighboring kingdom, nor was he a valiant knight. He was just an ordinary boy who was good at climbing trees and loved to explore. That's pretty cool. I sort of like that, like, did not have expectations, like, hey, this is who this guy is, right? More narration, like, hey, the two youths, as if it were truly a work of fate. As we see, like, a little bit of a bird coming and landing on Rapunzel's hand. This person who, from the title, or from the description, name is probably, Michael, or Michael. I don't want to say, like, Michael, but it also says, like, Michael. I don't know. Maybe I'll see what other people say about how to pronounce this name. Or maybe we put in, like, the Google or something to see, you know what? Let's, we're going to do a little thing. We're going to copy this name, and we are going to put it into Google. And, yeah, pronunciation. Oh, it looks like we got a YouTube video here on it. Let me turn up and see if you guys can hear this.
Is it possible?
Okay, we're going to mute that because there's an ad going real quick. I'm not cutting any of this, by the way. All right.
So make sure to stay tuned to the channel. How do you say it? Michael. Yes, indeed.
Michael. Okay. His name's Michael. Good to know. Maybe it is part of the Rapunzel tale. I don't really know. All right. Either way, heading back into the chapter. The true youths were tied to feel truly a work of fate, and they were drawn together and met. As we see this guy, Michael, climbing up this wicked witch's tower, he enters in the window where Rapunzel is sitting. And oh, look at that. They look at each other. That's a pretty nice panel, all things considered, for Rapunzel, very freaked out. Like, who is this guy who just, like, entered my room and everything? Oh, and then we see the main guy says, oh, Rosa. And she very much freaks out, like, tumbles off of her bed. It looks like it's pretty funny. He's like, oh, whoa there, like, hello, and Rapunzel's like, what, who are you, right? And Max is like, oh, hey, I'm sorry, like, I didn't mean to scare you. I was just exploring the forest, and there was this super tall tower, and, like, I couldn't help but get curious and started climbing up it. Like, I like climbing to high places. I'm pretty good at it, so I guess it sort of works in being that he was climbing the tree earlier, so that makes sense, right? Then she's like, hey, what was the first thing you said whenever you looked at me? And he's like, oh, hun. He's like, oh, Rosa? And he's like, oh, it just kind of popped in my head whenever I saw you. And he's like, oh, who is that? My name is Rapunzel, not Rosa. And he's like, oh, Rapunzel. We also see, in the meantime, we see Rapunzel sort of, like, huddled up against the doors to outside of the, castle from what, or tower from what it seems. She's holding up a broom as, like, a weapon of self-defense, like, don't hurt me, right? I was like, hey, are you looking for someone named Rosa? And he's like, no, I'm not a person. Rosa multiflora. It's kind of like a flower. And she's like, do you eat it? And he's like, what? And he's like, do you seriously not know? Like, but there are just so many blooming outside of the tower. And she's like, well, I've never been outside. And like, hey, I made a promise of a witch with Madame Witch. All right. She said it's scary and dangerous to go out there, so I must never leave the tower. She said it was for my sake. And he's like, all right, well, give me just a minute. As we see that Michael sort of jumps out the window almost and starts to climb back down. And he's like, oh, well, there's some truth to what that witch told you, but she's not completely right either. And he's like, hey, I'll show you. And it actually looks like he just, like, jumps out of the tower. It's like, we just see, like, the whoosh sound effect as Rapunzel runs up to windows. It's like, hey, wait, huh? As it looks like, what does she see? Okay, this is a little bit interesting. She gasps very loud, and she runs all the way to the door wherever it slams. And she's like, oh, thank goodness. If Madame Witch had known that a strange person had come inside. And then it seems like Madame Witch enters the building, and we just hear a voice say, Rapunzel. And we see this design of this woman who's in this black dress with, like, some very, like, ornate styling around the breast area. And in this, like, what I presume to be maybe, like, a green cloak of some kind. Of course, like, this is manga coloring. It is whatever I think it is, right? So, like, in this cloak, and she's like, oh, what has you so flustered? Did something happen in here? And Rapunzel's like, no. And she's like, oh, yes, a bee came through the window, so I fled the room. And we see Madame Witch sort of isn't taking this. She's like, oh, is that so? Well, there's nothing to worry about. It'll leave soon enough. There's nothing in your room for a bee to enjoy, after all. I will be out until evening, so be sure to eat something. And Rapunzel's like, oh, okay, sounds good. As we sort of just see that she sort of, like, exhales very briefly and like starts to look out the window and all that stuff, like, hey, what actually just happened here, right? And she sort of like looks out into her bedroom, just like, oh, he's not here? As we see laying on her bed are none other than two little flowers. As of course, these are presumed to be what I can guess those rosa flowers that Michael mentioned earlier. Rosa multiflora. There it is. And they're sort of sitting here on the bed. She's like, oh wow, it's white and pretty. Is this me? And she's sort of like holding these flowers in her hands. Suddenly Michael just says like, hey, watch out for the thorns. As we see that he's sort of just like hanging there inside of the tower, like just hanging onto the window. So I want to imagine that his legs are just like dangling off and like he's got the core body strength just like hold himself up through the window, right? And she's like, oh, were you there the entire time? And he's like, yeah, I told you I'd just be a minute, didn't I? And he's just like, hey, but anyway, more importantly, do you like it? And she's like, huh? What are you talking about? And she finally realizes, and she looks at the two flowers in her hands, just as like, oh yeah, this flower, it's so pretty, right? And she's like, hey, are you saying that this is me? And Michael just says like, yep, you're lovely and fair, just like that Rosa multiflora. That's really nice. We see that Rapunzel also starts to blush a little bit. A little bit of narration just says like, hey, Rapunzel was overcome by a feeling she had never experienced in her life. It was like doing a handstand for a long time or seeing a pair of shooting stars. A most particular sensation. As we then see that there seems to be a little bit of like a ding-dong going on in the area. Maybe it's like a bell tower or something, don't quite know, because this doesn't seem like a universe to have like automatic electric doorbells inside of like your chime kit and all of that various stuff, right? Okay, guys, can you tell I'm also an electrician by trade occasionally? He's like, oh, I'll be going later, and it's like, hey, oops, I gotta get back by sunset or my uncle's gonna yell at me. So yeah, that sort of makes sense, like it's a bell like denoting the time, and Michael's like, hey, shit, I gotta go somewhere, right? And then as he's starting to leave, Rapunzel's like, oh, and Michael just is like, hey, are you being held here against your will by a wicked witch? And we see that Rapunzel's like, no, that's not it. I mean, Madame Witch is a good person. She takes like really good care of me. Like, she only doesn't let me go outside because she's worried for me, right? And he just says like, hey, alrighty then. But I really don't get it. But if you can't go outside, then I'll just come back and bring you more stuff. And I'll tell you about what's on the outside, right? And he's like, hey, it's true there's some scary stuff out there, but there are also a bunch of fun and beautiful things. I want you to discover those things, just like I climbed this tower and discovered you. Oh, it's a really cute sentiment. Oh my gosh, I really do like that, right? He's like, all right, off I go then. As eventually we see Rapunzel's like, hey, wait, before you go, your name, what's your name? What should I call you? And he's like, oh, right, I forgot. I'm Michael, son of the blacksmith Rydell. As we see that he sort of like jumps out the tower once again. It's like we see the speed line just like pushing him down almost. But yeah, okay. His name is Michael. I'm glad I didn't mess that one terribly up from the onset of this series, right? But hey, like, I expected the description to be correct, and it was, right? But alright, he's the son of a blacksmith Rydell. I may need to reread, or not even a reread, I need to read the Rapunzel fairy tale after this and know how like much of this is sort of accurate, right? We see Rapunzel just thinks like, oh, Michael, right? More narration starts to go and continues saying like, hey, and so Rapunzel and Michael became friends. He would drop in from time to time and tell Rapunzel's stories of the outside world. Stories of his noisy family or the scaredy cat gravekeeper. Man, are we like going into like the Legend of Zelda universe, like with scaredy cat gravekeepers, right? Or his father, the blacksmith. The stories he told her of the outside world all sounded like fairy tales. I guess that's where the sort of like fairy tale crown comes forward into, what is it, Märchen Crown? Yeah, that's what this series is called. And in return, Rapunzel embroidered a Rosa multiflora on Michael's bag, and Rapunzel learned for the first time the joy of gifting something to another, when she discovered the name of that feeling was called love. Rapunzel found herself waiting in anticipation for his next visit. However, on one such day when Michael came to pay another visit, Rapunzel was quietly weeping. She had kept the flower from Michael in safely in a box this whole time, but she didn't realize that flowers could dry up and wither. So during this time, we see just like a bunch of various images of like the two of them just getting along, like Michael just like sitting on the windowsill, like telling Rapunzel about all of these various stories and things, right? And like a little bit of like a nice flower embroidered onto his bag. She's like, all right, at least this girl's just like not in here depraved of completely everything. Like it seems she has a few skills, right? Her outside looking outside the full moon at night, right? And Michael coming in and like Rapunzel crying over this flower that she kept in a box, right? It's dried up and withered, right? And Michael's like, oh, Rapunzel. And she's like, oh, this is all because I broke my word to Madame Witch, like my very precious flower. And Michael's like, hey, Rapunzel, it's okay. Flowers will eventually, like, that's just a law of the universe pretty much, right? And she's like, that's awful. Why do they have to wilt? And he's like, and she's sort of like just crying about all of this. And I guess Michael reached out a hand and says like, hey, Rapunzel, I'll give you my boots. So put them on and come with me. As we then see that Rapunzel is on the back of Michael, holding on to his back as he is climbing down the tower. And he's just like, hey, Rapunzel, whatever you do, just don't let go, which is a very true sentiment. Like, it seems like he can just jump out of this tower and be fine. Maybe he's like Spider-Manning around on all the trees and everything. But yeah, I think Rapunzel would definitely die if that was the case, right? And we see that they reach the ground, and narration still begins again, saying like, hey, for the first time in her life, Rapunzel stepped into the outside world. The feeling of the soft soil beneath her feet and the ticklish sensation of grass brushing her legs were new and scary to her. But her yearning for the unexplored outside world, and above all else, the warm hand that clasped her own, gave her the courage to move forward. As we see that they are traveling through the woods, and we see almost like there's this light at the end of the tunnel as Michael is running ahead of Rapunzel, sort of taking her hand, as we just see this grand image of what seems to be like just a light shining on the forest, and what really seems to be a patch of these Rosa multiflora flowers, all right? And then, yeah, going to the next panel, it seems like what it is. I'm actually interested to see where we are in a chapter right now. So we are 41 pages in. All right, definitely it hasn't felt like that. It's actually felt a bit shorter, but we see this. It's a beautiful 2-page spread. Oh my gosh, it's beautiful looking at all of these flowers here, right? And Michael's like, hey, Rapunzel, you don't have to be scared of flowers wilting. For as long as you're there, I'll pick you as many flowers as you want. And we see that Rapunzel sort of goes in, and sort of what I see in this image is like we just see how she's looking at Michael. It seems like she has this interesting little pendant on her chest, so the way it's just like sort of shown, like whenever she's swinging forward that she's wearing it. I'm interested to see if that comes up later, right? And she sort of goes up and does a massive hug onto Michael in the moment, and she's just like, hey, okay. As we didn't get narration saying like, hey, and with this, the two of them fell in love. Rapunzel made a wish. May these incredibly happy days last forever and ever. Forever and ever. Everlasting happiness. As long as we both shall live. The real world story begun several months after their first meeting. As we see like the two of them sort of like laying in the flower field, being very, very nice. Like, hey, you last forever and ever. And then we see like Michael going around and like pretty much just showing Rapunzel around everything. We see like the big tower in the background. Like he even shows her what a squirrel looks like, and she's like, oh, what is this little weird creature? And like, honestly, this is definitely a fairy tale realm, because like, I mean, look at this, like being able just like to hold a squirrel on your hand, like what's going on here, right? And then it looks like that's where chapter 0 ends, as we get a little bit of a title page saying like, hey, chapter number 1 is, it looks like, it's honestly a really interesting, I really like this design of like, it almost looks like a picture frame with the two of them sort of laying inside of it, right? And like, we see that Michael's hair is like coming outside the picture frame, and the two of them are laying in a field of flowers, presumably the Rosa multiflora flowers, right? And then it sort of seems like we are jumping in to chapter number 1 of this series. Like, we see that Michael's like, like, you want to come to my village, like, right now? And Rapunzel's like, yeah, I do. And she's like, hey, I've gotten so much more used to the outside now. Like, I want to meet everyone you've told me so much about, right? And Michael's like, hey, but if we go right now, we won't make it back till nighttime. And what about the witch? And she's like, hey, it's okay. I mean, there's a period where she leaves for 2 or 3 days each month. And like, hey, today is that day. So he's like, hey, it's fine, right? Please, oh, pretty please. And Michael's like, okay, sounds good. Right? We see this very interesting design choice outside of like what seems to be the Wicked Witch or Madame Witch, whatever you really want to call her at this point. I don't know, or just call her the Witch. Either way, it all works, right? It sort of seems like she's leaving of all the thorny mess that resides around Rapunzel's tower here, right? Or the Witch's Tower, I forget what it was referred to earlier. Michael's like, hey, okay, but hey, we're going to be traveling through the treetops, so take care not to fall, okay? And she's like, oh, really? You'll take me then? This is awesome! And then we just see that, like, she jumps onto her bed and just like, hey, yeah, I finally get to visit the real outside world. You can count on me. I'm very good at high places, as you know, right? So, looks like there's a little bit of some fun stuff going on here. And we see that Michael just watches this and just starts to laugh to himself a little bit. And Rapunzel's like, hey, what is it, right? And Michael just is like, oh, it's just what I was thinking. I got to see another new side of you. Oh, that's just I love that sentiment. That's really just so nice, right? We then see that he just continues like, hey, at first you were just a timid girl who cried easily, only to realize that you are actually really chillful and open-hearted. Like, the more time I spend with you, the more I get to see your different sides. But it's funny. And she's like, hey, funny, like, what is that? Like, is that a bad thing, right? And he's like, no. That's the opposite. It's what makes you the girl who I love so much. Oh, that's really cute. We see a really nice panel drawn of Michael here in this moment, right? We then get a close-up shot of, what's her name's eyes? Rapunzel's eyes in a moment. As she just thinks like, hey, Michael, you're always like this. You boldly say things that make me blush. When I look at you, I find myself hoping the embarrassment quickly passes, yet also wishing this feeling could last for all of eternity, right? So narration continues just saying like, hey, eternity, Michael taught me that word. It's something that goes on forever and ever, like the sky or the flow of time, like love. As you see a little bit of an interesting panel of it looks like Rapunzel's braided her hair, and it looks like she's going on with Michael as they are leaving the tower where, of course, she's been raised her entire life, right? More narration saying like, hey, Rapunzel thought, may I have the happiness I feel now last for an eternity. Please let me be together with this person for all eternity. As it seems like Michael is just leading Rapunzel by the hand. Of course, we see his backpack or his bag that has the flower embroidery on it, right? As eventually he's just like, hey, here we are, Rapunzel. They're like, hey, Rapunzel, welcome to my village. And we see all of the various things going on here of like, there's shrubbery and it seems like it's about to open up into something. And I feel like whenever I flip this page, it is going to be something random like, hey, we're in the real world or something, and this is just on the other side of some weird like, I don't know what this twist is about to be, but it feels like what page are we on? Yeah, we are on page 54. We cannot have too much longer in this chapter. It is about to be something completely crazy that I am not ready for. Okay, as soon as we flip the page, we see that Rapunzel has this very, very weird stare on her face, right? And Raphael's like, hey, or not Raphael, Michael's like, hey, well, how do you like it? Small and peaceful, right? My house is just over. And we see that he goes and grabs Rapunzel's arm or something, and she's a little, very much freaked out. She's shaking, right? And Michael is like, hey, what's going on here? And he's like, hey, what's wrong? You're frozen in place. And he's like, oh, hey, are you afraid? Oh, yeah, I guess it's your first time in a place of other people. And she's like, huh? And, really, it seems like she's not very happy about what's going on. I'm so interested to see what this is, right? And she's like, oh, and Michael's like, oh, hey, great timing as we hear some rustling as somebody's walking over. And he's like, hey, let me introduce you, Rapunzel. I talk about him all the time. This guy's my family. He's my uncle. What the? Okay. We flip the page, and we see this weird, eldritch-looking abomination of a person. It looks like almost like a skull made out of thorns and brambles almost. Oh, that's weird, man. yeah, we see that Rapunzel's not very happy about this, and it seems like this guy's just going like, we see like sound effects in the background going like doom, doom. And we see that Michael's like, oh yeah, I guess so. Well, I'll introduce her to you then. And we see that Rapunzel's like, hey, Michael, as we see that this sort of creature also has an eyeball who presumably is Michael's uncle. And he's like, as it sort of just seems like he's just like really breaking out something. And Michael's like, oh, oops, as it seems like he's going out, as the uncle is going out and touching Rapunzel's shoulder, right? And Michael just is like, oh, oops. And he goes through and he uses what seems to be a tree branch to smack the crap out of this weird eldritch abomination thing. It looks like blood flies off of it that touches Rapunzel's face, right? And Michael's like, oh, hey, sorry about that. Like, my uncle's a little shy. He goes a little funny whenever he sees somebody he doesn't know. And she's like, oh, and he's like, oh, hey, here, hold this. If you whack him once, he'll behave. As Michael hands Rapunzel this stick. And Rapunzel is scared as can be and starts to run away from everything going on here, right? And Michael sort of reaches out like, hey, Rapunzel, like, hey, what's wrong? And he's like, hey, come on, what's the matter, Rapunzel? You finally got to see, after being locked up all this time, for the first time in your life, it's the world outside. As we get this really interesting black panel or wherever we see Michael just sort of standing here saying this, right? And it's like, oh, hey, don't worry, guys. Rapunzel's on our side. As it looks like this entire village is made up of these weird, thorny people. As we see the uncle who's sort of standing behind Michael still, and we all see like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. I was almost about to maybe think like, hey, maybe Michael sees these people as what they really are, but like, not of him saying like, hey, if you whack them once or twice, they'll listen to you. It really seems like this is just the real world or something interesting like that. Oh, and then that's the final page of the chapter. All right, man, I am so interested in what this series is. Like, what in the world? It obviously seems to be like, yes, a fairy tale. And I wonder if there's a fairy tale that sort of like delves into this topic deeper. But I am just really so interested in like what's going on here. Like, all right, who is this witch who locked Rapunzel in this chapter? Like, I mean, overall, a very solid first chapter. Like this weird, like, I mean, like I said, as soon as we flipped the page, I knew it was going to be something random and scary. Honestly, I thought it would have been really funny if it was just like the real world. Like, this is just like, of course, I'm also Oshi no Ko-brained, so it's like, this is just like the filming of a movie set that Rapunzel's just like been in for too long or some crazy something like that. But also, man, it's just so weird and random to see in like this weird eldritch looking abomination thing, and then like Michael being like, hey, this is just family, smack him, it'll be fine. I'm really just so interested. And also, I didn't mention it, but on this final panel, we also see a bunch of crows also, like, calling. Man, I'm just, wow. I honestly don't know what to think. And, like, of course, this does sort of make sense being like, hey, the real world is scary on the outside. And, like, maybe this is what the real world is. Maybe there's, like, some curse or something, or maybe some disease that turns all of these people into these, like, weird vine monsters. Honestly, I really don't know. Golly, I hope, let me check how long I've been recording for this live read-through of this chapter. Yeah, we've been going for 30 minutes, so honestly, I don't really know what else to say about this initial chapter of the series. Like, I will say, the first part of this is just so incredibly cute with, like, the two of them meeting, all of this various fairy tale-like stuff, and I guess it makes sense, like, hey, we have this chapter 0 coming all the way through here, really getting introduced to Rapunzel, the idea of the flowers, and the two of these characters, Michael, like, everlasting love. Just, like, going through their meeting, it's all just very nice. I like the design of both the main characters. Definitely Michael has this garb on, like, reminds me of, like, a traveler of some kind, so I do like it. And then just going through everything, like, yeah, this was a fine chapter. I definitely did enjoy it. Going through, like, total of the flower-filled thing is, it's like, hey, these two's love will last forever. And of course, what is that? That's 45 pages in, about the average, like, a first chapter of manga. So like, hey, it's chapter number 0. And then we get like an additional, like, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 page chapter on top of that, which finishes out the rest of the chapter. So very interesting for sure. And I'll be interested to see where this story goes next. Maybe I'll continue to cover it on the channel. Mainly I was just doing this like, hey, I covered Oshi no Ko for such a long time, and I all of a sudden talked to myself like, hey, maybe in the future after Oshi no Ko ends, I'll cover Asakasa's next work, and hey, if this is what it is, I'll be interested to follow it for sure, and if you guys want me to make videos on it, maybe I'll try to add it into the average location. But hey, with all that out of the way, thank you guys so very much for watching this video on Märchen Crown, chapter number 0 and chapter number 1, I guess, along with like, hey, the very weird number scheming of like, hey, we have 6 digits of numbers, they're all zeros except for the number 1 at the very end. A lot of really intriguing stuff going on with this series, and yeah, I'll be excited to check it out next time. And hey, if you guys enjoyed this video, like I mentioned, I talk about plenty of anime, manga related content on this YouTube channel. I talked about Oshi no Ko for a good long while, definitely enjoyed that series to its fullest. And also I currently cover a bunch of the series in Weekly Shonen Jump, along with covering a separate series on Kagurabachi, with occasionally getting to some other manga series as I get to it, along with some anime series. Really, you can check out all that stuff down in the description down below. I'll have the link to like the YouTube channel. Also, just like click on the channel header, see all of that various stuff. But yeah, I really don't have anything else to say. Very interesting chapter. I'll be interested to see where this twist goes on from here. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. This was Märchen Crown chapter number 1, or 6 digits 1, however we're supposed to say that. And yeah, I'll catch you guys next time. This would be Goldplasma231 signing out.